Guys, today I want to talk to you about nesting rounded corners. So what I mean by that is if you just imagine like a rectangle, for example, like the rectangle inside of this card, the inner rectangle, there's an outer rectangle, and that's separated by that white space. And that white space is kind of like the padding of the inner rectangle. So if you notice, the white space, the thickness of it remains consistent all the way around the card. It's kind of like if you had a pipe and you bent it, even on that bend, the thickness of the pipe remains consistent. In the case of UI design, this happens very often that you have a rounded corner within a rounded corner. And there's a couple of nuances that can really make or break the appearance of that design. So let's jump into Figma and I'll show you guys a couple of examples of what I'm talking about and how we can fix and optimize that look so that, we're on the better end of the spectrum. Let's use an example here. Here's an example of rounded corners, nested rounded corners. That's a bit of a mouthful, but use in a good way, use in a way that actually works. In this case, you have this white tile here. It has this blue padding and the background. As you can see here, the distance or the thickness of this blue line remains consistent, not only on the straight edges, but also on the rounded corner here too. That's the key point. So here's an example of it done poorly. The designer who did this maybe intuitively thought that, hey, this inner rounded corner, the radius should be the same as this radius. On some level, that does seem like it would make sense, but clearly it's not based off of how this looks. It's kind of unsettling because this distance on the straight edge is consistent, but once you get around to the vertice, it just completely gets thrown off. Here's an example of what it looks like fixed. So as you can see, it's a huge difference. This is a lot more relaxing. This is a lot more zen, perfect rounded nested corner, whereas this one completely throws it off. So let's take a look at Figma and see how we can fix this problem. So here's the example of the bad nested rounded corner that we were talking about earlier in the example. So as you can see here, there's something off about it. We don't know exactly what it is, but now that we're talking about rounded nested corners, let's go a little bit deeper into what that means. So I have a bit of an illustration that I did here a bit earlier, just in case you guys want to follow along. This is a rectangle size 300 by 300, and I arbitrarily just chose a corner radius of size 20. So what does size 20 mean? Size 20 means that there is a circle that happens to sit perfectly within this little nested, this rounded corner here, that happens to be not only of a radius of 20, it's a diameter of 40. You take that radius and you double it, and it fits here perfectly. But because you use the outer radius as 20 as well, it also fits there too. So what you want to do to better optimize this outer radius is you take the inner one and you add the distance between both. In this case, it's 15. So here you have 20. I'm actually pointing at the radius of the inner one, the corner radius of the inner, which is 20, and you add 15 to it, and that means the outer corner radius should be 35. Hopefully my math is correct. Let's see how that looks. Let's zoom out, and yes, there you go. Let's take a look and see what we did here. Maybe at a very quick glance, they might not be super different, but the attention to detail here is uncanny. It's a really big deal. This is it's just not right. Whereas this one here, you have a consistent distance going along the entire perimeter of it. Let's try a different way. We'll do the same thing with the rectangle. We'll make a square right here, and instead of this fill, we'll give it something like that. Let's round the corners again to, let's say, 30. So you wouldn't usually duplicate this and then, try to, place them inside of each other like I did earlier here. Realistically, you'd use something like auto layout. So with auto layout, I'm just going to hit Shift A, and I have the padding here at 10. So that essentially would be your distance. So I have the inner radius here at 30. The padding is here. Let's actually just add some fill to it so that you can see what I'm talking about. Let's do something with a higher contrast so you guys can see. So what would the corner radius for this one be? So we said here before the inner one is 30. The outer one would be 30 plus 10 because that's our padding all the way around. So all we got to do is add the outer corner radius as 40, and we have a perfect rectangle. Also, just to note, when you're scaling these things, if you simply just lock your aspects in and just go Shift Option and scale it up and down, you'll notice that the outer and inner radius or radii remain the same because the distance between the two remains the same. Whereas if you were to scale it in a different approach, you could use the scaling tool, which is K on the keyboard. This actually changes the inner and outer radius because it scales the entire image or the entire vector as a whole, and the outer radius and the inner radius change accordingly. So that's just a consideration to make when you are manipulating these, manipulating nested rounded corners. So yeah, keep that in mind, guys. And just for another reference, you guys can use, I found this calculator on cloud4.com. They go more into the math involved with nesting rounded corners, and they actually have a pretty intuitive calculator here that'll probably make it easier for you to nest those damn rounded corners. So good luck, guys. Hopefully this was informative, and please do not mess up on nesting these rounded corners. All right, have a good one, guys. See ya.